So this video is an addendum to yesterday's video pretty much. So if you haven't seen yesterday's video, I had a look at all the talk with regards to where Daniel drove and what he was driving the morning that the children were reported missing. There seemed to be a lot of holes in the narratives, a lot of contradictions, a lot of things that appear to be red flags. Now, part of what I'm talking about in today's video was actually meant to be part of yesterday's video. And I played some audio in yesterday's video and said, and I'll come back to that, and I left it hanging. I only realised this after I had uploaded the video, and I could have just privated the video and then just re-edited and fixed where I stuffed up, but that would have been a heck of a lot of work, and I was already really late finishing. Normally the process with these videos is that I plan them out, I figure out what audio I need, I go through my transcripts and I make notes of timestamps, and I go and do screen recordings of all the audio that I need, which is what I did in preparation for yesterday's video. However, I missed one of the screen recordings, and it was kind of important as a follow-up to one part that I played. But I didn't even realise that I'd missed it, because normally I'm pretty efficient in terms of having everything laid out in my video, so that by the time it comes for me to record, I'm just going from one clip to the next. It's all prepared for me. I'm just adding my explanation. Admittedly, there were several interruptions yesterday, so that I was stopping and starting working on that video multiple times. And of course, the final interruption was several hours long, meaning that when I got back to the video, not only was it getting quite late at night, but also I had had several hours of not thinking about what I'd already said. So I ended up just completely overlooking that bit of information that I'd left out. I don't think it was integral to yesterday's video, and I think it probably works better as a separate video anyway, so I'm not too bothered now. But I still thought it was important because it shows us that Janie really was doing her best to cover for Daniel. I also think that my argument or explanation at the end of yesterday's video probably fell short a little bit. Probably because I was tired, probably because I'd had that big gap between doing the first part of the video and finishing it, so I'd forgotten a lot of what I'd already discussed. So there's a bit more audio that I want to touch on that I think will probably help to maybe clarify a bit of this confusion over who was driving what when, or it could just add to the confusion. So again, before I jump in, I just want to say a thank you to all the people who are supporting me in the ways that they are able to do. So for the people who are doing the Buy Me a Coffee, people who are doing super chats, super thanks, people who are supporting me through channel membership, through Patreon membership, and most importantly, everyone who subscribes to my channel, because that is one of the super important things that helps my channel to grow, and it helps my channel to get out there and be seen by more people. So everyone who is supporting me in every possible way, thank you, you are greatly appreciated. That said, if you like my content and you're not yet subscribed to my channel, you can help me out by subscribing. I would dearly love to reach my goal of 7,000 by the end of this year. So if you're not subscribed and you can subscribe and help me with that, I would be so appreciative. So on that note, let's jump straight into this video. So what I want to start with connects to my discussion yesterday about how Malehya's vehicle ended up left on Lansdowne Road. Daniel very carefully avoids mentioning the fact that he's the one that was driving the vehicle. He just blames the fact that they were meant to take the vehicle, referring to Cheryl and Hayley clearly, but as I pointed out in yesterday's video, there was some sort of argument that occurred after the initial argument, after the briefing, after Malehya had gone, and at the time of that argument, things were discussed with relation to Malehya's car and Malehya's cell phone. Malehya's cell phone was collected, but for some reason Malehya's car was not collected. My theory on that, based on what we know of coercive control and based on what we know of Daniel, is that he basically didn't hand over the keys for Malehya's vehicle, so Hayley and Cheryl couldn't collect it. I don't know whether that would be a situation of going, oh, I can't find the keys, Malehya must have the keys, or just going, yeah, no, you can't have the keys. I suspect that Daniel probably allowed Malehya's vehicle to be towed, in that he's claiming that, you know, the RCMP were just really annoyed and they got it towed because it was in the way. I would imagine that first they would have said to him, you know, do you have keys for this vehicle so it can be moved? And he probably denied that he had keys. It was his way of punishing Malehya, basically, to have her car towed. But the question, of course, was, if he parked her car in Lansdowne Road, then how did he end up back at Gairloch Road? Did he bring another vehicle back? And that ties into Brad Wong's comment that the trips that were made in the early hours of Friday morning, the final trip was made in a vehicle that was not the same noisy vehicle. And my speculation was that Daniel's vehicle was left somewhere on Lansdowne Road, and perhaps someone dropped him back at the property, or he took his uncle's or his father's vehicle back to Gairloch Road. Perhaps the reason why he allegedly went straight to Lansdowne Road to search on that morning, Friday morning, was to get his car off the road. Maybe his car was in the location where Malehya's vehicle ended up parked, and he did a swap over, and that's why he parked next to the marsh as opposed to going up and parking in the driveway or next to the driveway. The question that arose from all that, however, was we have this account from Brad Wong that the vehicle that came back to the property in the last trip wasn't Daniel's vehicle. But it clearly wasn't Malehya's vehicle because her vehicle was already on the property, which is why I believe that he probably brought back his uncle's or his father's vehicle. Maybe it was because he brought a truck back as opposed to his own vehicle because he needed to put something in the bed of that truck. Something that needed to be moved that was perhaps too big to go in his car. But then that creates the problem, of course, of if he brought back his father's or his uncle's vehicle, how was it then retrieved? Maybe they walked across in daylight, because it's only, as the crow flies, if you go along the back, I think Janie has said that it's not a huge distance. I think it would be less than a kilometre's walk, so, 15-minute stroll, go and collect your vehicle. Or maybe there was a different solution, and that's where we come in to this video. So I want to talk about Janie's ATV. She claims it's her ATV, she didn't keep it on the property because she was worried about it being stolen, yada yada. That's not relevant for this video. But there's one lot of audio that I want to play, and then there's an excerpt from the documents that I want to go through. So let's start with the audio first.
Because then Justin showed up, and then I told Justin to go get the bike, the four-wheeler, and I came back over to my trailer. our RV here and just waited around here until Justin came.
Now, before I talk about what Janie actually said, I just want to point out the way she's drawing out all her words while she's giving this explanation. She told Justin to go get the bike. Nearly every other word is drawn out. That, to me, says that she's making this up as she goes along. Of course, my question is, she says, oh, then Justin turned up. And my question is, did he turn up or was he already there on the property? Because we have heard from Belinda that she was told that Justin was staying there at the time the children went missing. And it wasn't just Belinda who heard that. Her sister was with her and heard Malehya say that. So there is a big question mark over that. And yet Janie goes, yeah, and then Justin turned up. And she said, I told him to go get the bike. And he clarifies the four-wheeler, or she clarifies the four-wheeler. And then there's a long pause. The I is drawn out. And I think she's trying to figure out what she would say she was doing while Justin was getting the four-wheeler. Because the next part, the rhythm of it is just off. You know, she's saying that she came back into the trailer or the RV and waited till Justin came back. But it's all drawn out. There's pauses in between. Like I said, I think it sounds fabricated to me because it isn't as fluent as you would expect and because of the drawn out words. Now, what's interesting here, you know how Janie does this thing where she gives you just enough information to make you reach the conclusion that she wants you to reach. So she never says something outright if it's not going to be truthful. She just gives you a nudge in the right direction so you come to that conclusion. A classic example of this is when she's doing her CBC interview and she's talking about the swings. And she's like, these are the swings. This is where they used to play, or something like that. But she never says explicitly that they were actually playing on the swings. Another one which so many of us got caught up on for months was her saying that she didn't believe the children went through the woods. But then on the flip side of that, saying the only place they would have gone would be to the fort in the woods or the cabin in the woods or whatever she called it. And we were like, well, you're contradicting yourself, but she wasn't. Because what she was talking about was going for walks in the woods, as in going beyond that spot and going for walks through the woods. The through the woods there was integral. But she wanted us to come to the conclusion that the children would not have gone into the woods, because by the time that she was doing these little talks on Facebook, we had Durwood's story that had come out, and her and Daniel a little bit later on was starting to latch onto Durwood's story because it was a convenient story to give Daniel an alibi. So what she's done here is she said, I told Justin to go get the bike, the four-wheeler, and then I waited in my RV until Justin came back. Now, from that, you would reach the conclusion that Justin went and collected the ATV. And that's the interpretation that you make from what she's saying here. But she never explicitly said that Justin actually did go and get the ATV. Is it possible that she may have said, oh, you go get the ATV, and he went, maybe ended up doing something else, and someone else got the ATV? Or maybe, given that, like I said, the way she's saying this, everything is drawn out like she's thinking it up on the spot, maybe this is just one humongous fabrication. Even if Janie is being truthful here, the only thing we know for a fact is that she told Justin to get the ATV and that Justin went somewhere and then Justin came back. There's no mention of whether or not he actually went and got the ATV. So, aside from the way that she tells it, why am I questioning this? Let's have a look at what Janie said to the RCMP. So, looking at the third line down, we have, this is what Janie said. She said one of her brothers went to get an ATV and they continued searching. Janie said for the rest of Friday she searched for the kids with her family members, plural. Again, this to me suggests that actually her story about her and Justin searching on the ATV is made up. She was not with Justin on the ATV. But the point here is that she's saying one of her brothers went to get an ATV and continued searching. And here's where I feel that I came a little bit unstuck in yesterday's video. I knew in my head what I wanted to say, but like I said, because I'd had a long break before I went to finish the video and because it was getting late, when I started talking about Janie's brother Ron, I was then getting confused in my head as to his movements, how that would all work. But here's the thing. If what we're being told here is Ron went and collected the RV and brought it back to the property. But the thing is, we know that RV stayed on that property for several days at least. Which means that once again you have a situation of Ron or whoever collected the RV having gone to the location where the RV is and returned with it. And let's say it was Ron and the RV was kept at his place. Then that means he's then at 1407 Gairlock Road. If he's gone and taken his vehicle to his place to collect the RV and come back with the RV, then his vehicle's back at his place and he's at 1407. Yes, as Janie said, it's only like about a kilometre's walk to go from there to his place. But these are people in their 60s and 70s. Janie says she's 60. I don't know how old her brothers are, and I've not seen any photos of Ron. But none of them are getting any younger. Did he have a trailer for the ATV? Did he have ramps so he could drive the ATV onto the back of his truck? Or maybe his truck was already at 1407 because somebody drove it there during the night and he drove the ATV across so that he could then later on take his truck home. Is that how we get the vehicle juggling in terms of that mysterious vehicle, whatever vehicle Daniel brought back in the final trip? Maybe that was the plan all along. Like I said, maybe there was something that was too big to go in Daniel's sedan and he needed the truck to move whatever the last thing was that had to be moved from 1407 and put out of sight. Now, we could speculate on this all day, but the point here is Janie lied. She told one story to the RCMP and another story to her Facebook friends. Is one of those stories the truth, or are they both lies? And what's the motivation for lying? Is she covering for Daniel somehow? Is she covering for an absence from Justin? Because here's the other thing. Justin was, according to Janie's narrative, he was there on Friday, he was there on Saturday, he was with Janie searching the whole time. Where's his vehicle? We don't see it in any of the news footage. Anyway, I'm not going down that rabbit hole because we'll probably never get out of that one. So we've already got Janie lying here about the ATV. Somehow, the ATV got to her property, allegedly. But we don't know who actually collected it because she's told two stories. The other possibility, of course, is that the ATV was already on her property and she's lied to us about that, because we don't know. We have no aerial footage of the property from prior to when the children were reported missing. So we don't know if that ATV was already on the property. Maybe, as some people have suggested, the vehicle that Brad Wong heard that he thought was actually the ATV. I know we have an account from Justin Smith saying that Brad Wong told him that the vehicle was Daniel's. But what if Justin misinterpreted and Brad was saying it's Daniel's ATV? Just thought I'd throw that in there just to confuse you a little bit more. Now, I made a video several months ago pointing out the fact that everyone seemed to have gravitated to the old road behind Janie's property, which I find really curious. Like, why? What was going on? One of the big questions for me is, if Janie believes that the children wouldn't have gone any further than the forts on the hill, why would she walk all the way up to that road up behind her property? It seems odd. She gives this account that she gets up there and she runs into Daniel. Although she says she met Daniel, which could imply that it was pre-arranged. I speculated in yesterday's video that maybe what she's talking about here is something that occurred on the Thursday night, or like in those early hours of Friday morning. And something I had speculated on some time back relates to Justin's account of Daniel's movement in the vehicle when he heard it during those early hours. He believed that the vehicle travelled along 209 to Lansdowne Road, turned or stopped for a while, turned, and then headed back in the direction of Leg Road, in other words, back along 289, back towards 1407. Something I suggested was, is it possible that, in fact, the reason there are no other witnesses is because maybe that vehicle was actually on the track behind the property, the old road? I think, though, that when you factor in Daniel's own account of his route on the Friday morning, which is the same account as what Justin has said in terms of he heard this vehicle going this direction, Daniel has said that's the route that he first took on the Friday morning. You also have Malehya's vehicle left at the bottom of Lansdowne Road, and like I said, I'm speculating that it was left there because Daniel needed to get his vehicle off the road there, because I suspect it was not roadworthy, hence the reason why it was parked next to the marsh. So I suspect that my original speculation in terms of Daniel heading to Lansdowne Road along that road behind Janie's property was wrong. But what's interesting is this account that we have from Janie of the Friday morning, where she says she went out searching it and she got all the way up to that road at the top and she met Daniel, and then he was like, "Are you going to come with me?" And she's like, "No." So I've got 2 bits of audio from that, and then I've got another interesting bit of audio to follow up with.
I did this whole area. There's an old road up back. When I got up to the end, to the top of the hill, I met Daniel. And I said to him, I said, "Did you find them?" He said, "No." He said, "You coming with me?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm going to search this area."
So there's no ambiguity here in this clip, because Janie is pointing it out while she's there. So she's standing on the bank and she's pointing, "There's this old road up behind my property here, and I met Daniel up there." We get that odd statement of, "I asked him, did you find the children?" I mean, why would you say that when you could see that the children weren't with him and that he was still out searching? There's something not right with this narrative. Okay, so now for the Facebook version.
But I know that when I left here after I seen Malehya standing out there and asked her what was up. And she told me that Jack and Lily were missing. And I said, how long? She said about 20 minutes. After that, as I said, I come in, got my boots on, and I went up the hill. And I met Daniel, as I said, up the top of the old road just above my RV. So if you look at the map or the aerial view of my place, I don't know if it shows you or not, but if you look at an aerial map of it, you will see an old road just up the top of the hill here. So when I get up at the top of the hill, I seen Daniel, and I asked him if he found the kids yet. He was in the vehicle, in Malehya's vehicle, and he said no. And he asked me if I was going with him. I said no. I said I'm going to search this area here.
Now, I'll give her one thing. Janie, when she makes up a script, she tends to be able to repeat it almost verbatim. So she's given us the same story again. She went up, got to the road up the back. This time, because she's telling it as opposed to she's doing it on camera, she gives a description of where the road is, and then we get the same story again. She met Daniel, and she's like, did you find them? But in this one, she gives the added detail of how Daniel got there. He was in the vehicle, in Malehya's vehicle. She has to emphasise that he was in Malehya's vehicle. Now, there's a few things that Janie does establish around this, and that's been established from Daniel's stories as well, that this allegedly occurred before the RCMP arrived. In one of her retellings, Janie claims that she was up the top of the hill and she could hear the sirens of the RCMP. Now, I've got to question that, because I would imagine that for a missing children's case, that there would be no need for sirens. You know, there's no public safety issue here. So I would imagine that the RCMP, while they would have been still getting there as quickly as possible, first of all, legally, they wouldn't be allowed to speed because there's no risk to public safety. They don't need to get there as a matter of urgency. Yes, it is urgent in terms of that the first few hours are critical when children go missing, but it's not something that would warrant them speeding. Hence, they really wouldn't need their sirens to alert other vehicles to get out of the way. You also get this account from Janie that when she got back down, the RCMP had arrived, but she's like, I'd only been gone about 10 minutes or so. So what has been really clearly established by Janie here is that her getting to this road up behind her property and meeting Daniel occurred prior to the RCMP arriving, or at the very least, when she met Daniel, the RCMP would have maybe arrived at 1407 and still be talking to Malehya, still be checking out the property. Essentially, this had to have occurred prior to any search efforts extending beyond the property at 1407 Gerlock Road. This is significant, and you'll understand after you hear this next clip.
Talking about the old road up at the top of the hill, I can hear people when they go up that road. My dog lets me know when they go up that road. And the only one that goes up that road is usually my neighbor, and he has a really, really noisy truck. Believe me, a really noisy truck, so we know when he's coming from miles away. But no one has any reason to go up that old road. There was a tree across the old road, so the only way anybody could get up that road is an old road if they walked. The RCMP cut the tree out of there so they could get up to search. So there's no way anybody's going to walk up that old road.
We all know the saying, if you want to be a good liar, you've got to have a good memory. One of the things that Janie does on numerous occasions is she's got all these little scripts that she's memorised. And it's one of those things where she starts on that topic and she pulls out that particular script. So in terms of the searching up the hill, meeting Daniel on the road up the back, that was part of the whole script with, I saw Malehya, she was standing there with Meadow on her hip. I went and got my boots and my coat. I went up the hill. I ended up at the road at the back. That is that narrative. Because it's something that has been put together as a sequence of events, if you asked her to disassemble that and you were to say, okay, so before you met Daniel at the top of the hill, what were you doing? She would probably go back to the beginning of the narrative and have to work to the point just before she met Daniel at the top of the hill. Because it's not something that she's visualised in her head, because it's a made-up story. How do I know that? Because what she's done here, she's introduced a new narrative here. Now, this particular bit of audio that I just played, where she's talking about the neighbour with the noisy vehicle, this audio came out after we heard about Brad Wong hearing a noisy vehicle. Now, in terms of the timeline, I can't remember specifically if this new audio from Janie came out after Brad Wong spoke to Globe and Mail or CBC or whoever it was, or if it was after the documents, but it was definitely after the information came out about the loud vehicle making several trips from 1407 in the early hours of the morning. So Janie has suddenly introduced this narrative about the only vehicle that goes up this road behind my property is my neighbour who's got a really loud truck. You can see what she's trying to do here. She is trying to deflect from this story about the loud vehicle being heard coming and going from 1407 and create the impression that actually, you know what, this neighbour that's reported hearing this, that they're mistaken. They've actually heard a neighbour who goes up and down this road, which actually reminds me that this comes from the news media, not the document. Because at this point in time, Janie didn't know who it was that had claimed, she didn't know which neighbour it was that had claimed they heard this loud vehicle coming and going. So her response is to claim that she's got a neighbour with a loud vehicle and you can hear it. Because she didn't have the information from Justin Smith in terms of this vehicle was heard going along Gerlock Road to Lansdowne Road and back. She didn't have the information that the person reporting seeing the lights and hearing the vehicle was Brad Wong. She only had the information that was put out by the media that someone had spoken to them and said that they had heard this vehicle. So she's jumping on and trying to create an alibi for Daniel, trying to make it sound like the person that was heard must have been this neighbour with the loud truck. But she's done it in her usual Janie way, where she just gives us enough information and expects us to draw that conclusion ourselves. This news has just come out from whichever news station it was that a vehicle had been heard. There was a lot of online chatter about this vehicle that had been heard. People were speculating that maybe it was the ATV. So Janie's jumping on here to try and direct the narrative. But because she's not going to outright lie and say that she heard the neighbour driving back and forth on that night, she's just going to lead her audience in that direction and talk about how the only vehicle is this neighbour. So she's basically saying, we can hear him from miles away. And she starts going from there. And what she's trying to establish is that he's the only one that uses that road. So in her brain, this is her way of locking it in. This is who you need to be looking at in terms of this loud vehicle that was heard. It's my loud neighbour. Problem is, in trying to establish that he's the only one that uses that road, which is intended to make people think that it has to be him that was heard, she screws up big time. She says no one has any reason to go up that road. There was a tree across that old road, so the only way anybody could get up that road is if they walked. So what she's trying to do here is convince people that the only way people would go up that road would be if they walked, unless it was this neighbour with the really loud vehicle. Her argument is falling apart here, especially when she follows up by saying the RCMP cut the tree out of there so they could get up to search. She's just completely destroyed all her narratives in one go. Because her whole point of introducing this neighbour with the loud vehicle was to try and convince people that that's what was heard the night before the children were reported missing, or in those early hours. But she's just basically said there was a tree blocking that road, so the only way people could get up there was if they walked. Trying to say that that could be the only vehicle that went up there, she's forgotten that if she's saying that the only way people could get in there because there was a tree was if they walked, she's forgotten that eliminates the neighbour's vehicle also. But not only that, it eliminates her story of walking up through the woods and meeting Daniel at the top, and Daniel was in Malehya's vehicle. Because that narrative, that allegedly occurred before RCMP started searching, meaning that this tree was still blocking the road at the time that she walked up to that road up the back. So how would Daniel get on there? She's done a classic Janie stuff up where she forgets about the things that she made up, and she throws in some factual information to convince people, and doesn't realise that the factual information that she's just thrown in has just destroyed her narrative. And she's very matter of fact when she talks about the RCMP having to cut that tree out so they could search. So of all those three statements, that's the one that sounds the most credible. So she has essentially lied, first of all, about meeting Daniel on this road up the back of the property, and he was in Malehya's car. Because he couldn't get on there because RCMP hadn't started searching yet. They hadn't removed that tree that was blocking the road. She's also lying about the neighbour going up there with a loud vehicle. Like I said, this was something that she clearly invented as a response to the news report coming out about the neighbour hearing a loud vehicle. So what does she decide to do? She's going to straight away create a narrative about a neighbour who's got a loud vehicle that drives up over the hill, because then that makes it sound like that vehicle, they must have thought, just because the vehicle was close to the property, they must have confused it with a vehicle coming and going from their property. But she's forgotten that in terms of the timeline, that has to have happened before the search occurred. So she's shot herself in the foot by then saying, essentially, yeah, no other vehicles could get that way because there was a tree in the way, which I think she was trying to use as an argument for, look at this neighbour, they're the only person that could have been heard because no one else could get through that way. Well, did that neighbour have a vehicle with wings? Was it a hovercraft or something? How did they get the vehicle over the tree that had to be cut down or moved away? So, why has Janie lied? She's lied about who went and collected the ATV, or who brought it over maybe. And she's lied about Daniel's location on the Friday morning, which is a huge red flag to me. Oh, he was on that road in Malehya's vehicle. And actually, that doesn't match with Daniel's account. And she's also lied about this neighbour with a loud truck. There is one motive behind all Janie's stories. And you guys know what it is anyway. But let's listen to this little bit of audio first that confirms it.
And another thing, I'm going to tell you something now. If something happened to my children, my boys, I would be so hysterical, even though they're 34 and 33. I would still be hysterical if something happened to them. Even though they're growing up. Mama will always be a part of their lives, no matter how old they are. And Mama feels for those kids. I don't care if my kid, if I'm 85 years old and my kid is 60-some years old, I am still going to worry about my children. And I am still going to cry for my children.
Now, you've got to give it to her. She does make a good point here. You never stop being a mother. I can remember after my dad died of cancer, and Nan said to us, a mother should never outlive their child. And she was so heartbroken. Dad was in his 60s, Nan was in her 80s, but that didn't matter. He was her only son. He was her son. She was just devastated. She never got over it. So, yes, there is that link between a mother and their child. But honestly, I got Kathy Bates vibes when she said, Mama will always be a part of their lives. She's trying very hard to establish here how much she cares for her boys. She's trying to establish here that they will always be really important to her, no matter how old they are. She will still worry about them, even when she's 85 and they're 60-something. The thing is, though, she's worked really, really hard to show us here how incredibly important her children are to her. How they will always be super important to her. How she will always worry about them. When you talk about how you will always worry about your children, that goes alongside, I will always protect my children. Because if you worry about your children, yes, you are always going to make sure you are being protective of your children also. So she has told us in her own way that essentially she will do anything for her children. That to me says the only reason she would lie about who collected the ATV would be to protect one of her sons. So the fact that she told the RCMP that one of her brothers went and collected it, and then said that she told Justin to go get it, but she doesn't say that Justin actually did. There's something in that There's a lie in that. One of those statements is a lie, or both of those statements is a lie. What's the motivation for lying? Well, given that the focus is on Daniel, I'm guessing that is the motivation. Again, the talking about this road behind the property, she's establishing, she says the same story a few times, that she walked up to the road at the back of the hill and she met Daniel there. And in the retelling that she does for Facebook, Daniel was in Malehya's vehicle. And then we get the story about the neighbour with the loud vehicle, which is intended to distract from this story that came out in the media about a loud vehicle coming and going from Gairloch Road, 1407. Because immediately people were saying, well, what was Daniel doing? So she's come up with these two stories involving this road behind her property, but then she's shown us that they're both lies when she's slipped out the fact that the road was blocked off up until the point when the RCMP removed the tree that was down so that they could search. Again, the only reason why she would make these lies would be to protect Daniel. I think for me what is most significant is that second lie, where she's trying to establish that there's this neighbour with a loud vehicle that drives up and down that road, trying to get her audience to jump to the conclusion that that's who was heard, and then she shoots herself in the foot with the tree on the road thing, because the only reason she would need to lie about a neighbour with a loud vehicle going up and down that road would be because it is true about Daniel doing those trips in those early hours of the morning. So the irony in all this, Janie's lied to try and protect Daniel, but her lies have backfired to the point where she's actually incriminated Daniel. There is no other reason for her to make up this story, this lie, about the neighbour with the loud vehicle, trying to get people to believe that that's the vehicle that was heard by the neighbour, unless she is trying to protect Daniel. So that brings us to the end of this video. These are by no means the only times that we catch Janie out in lies, but I wanted to relate them to the video that I did yesterday. If you haven't listened to the two videos that I did back to back talking about vehicles, then I will add the link for that in the description for this video so that you can go and watch them. Just warn you that the second one is 2 hours long. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you are new to my channel, like I said, please subscribe. Help me to reach that goal of 7,000 subscribers by the end of this year. And also please hit that like button that gets this out there into the algorithm, gets more people seeing it. And please leave a comment below. I'm once again interested to see your thoughts on what I've discussed in this video. So thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Give a fuck about me, 'cause if you